The coldest winter in living memory had swallowed the northern kingdom. Snow fell without mercy. The sky had disappeared behind thick grey clouds that had not moved for days. Frozen winds screamed across endless forests, bending ancient pine trees until they groaned like tired giants. Rivers had become sheets of crystal. Mountains wore crowns of ice. Every creature that could hide had already disappeared beneath the snow. Only the desperate remained outside. People said winter revealed the truth about every wolf. It showed who was strong enough to survive, and who would be forgotten beneath the snow. Far beyond the villages stood the forbidden forest. Few dared to enter. Older wolves whispered that the forest remembered every battle ever fought. They believed the spirits of ancient alphas still wandered between the trees, watching every traveler who crossed their land. That morning, even experienced hunters avoided the place. Then, a cry shattered the silence. It wasn't the roar of a grown wolf. It wasn't the howl of a hunter. It was small, weak, frightened. The heartbreaking cry echoed through the frozen valley. One hunter stopped. What was that? Another slowly lifted his spear. It came from the ravine. They followed the sound carefully until they reached a broken cliff covered in fresh snow. Below them, pieces of cracked ice floated across dark freezing water. Hidden beneath the shattered ice, a tiny silver-grey wolf cub struggled to breathe. One of his small legs was trapped beneath a fallen branch. Bright red blood spread slowly across the white snow. The cub whimpered again. His frightened blue eyes searched desperately for help. One hunter gasped, "No!" Another stepped backward. "I know that scent." The oldest hunter lowered his head immediately. The royal bloodline. Silence. Every face turned pale. No ordinary cub carried that scent. This was one of the Alpha King's family. Helping him meant responsibility. If they failed, if the cub died in their hands, the Alpha King's anger would destroy entire packs. Fear spread faster than compassion. "We should report this. We don't have time. The river is rising. What if we make it worse?" One by one, they stepped away. The cub cried louder. No one moved. One hunter closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." Then every one of them disappeared into the storm. Soon, only the wind answered the cub's cries. Hours passed. The snow grew heavier. The little wolf's breathing became slower. His body trembled violently. His eyes began closing. Far away, another lonely figure walked through the forest carrying a bundle of firewood tied with rough rope. Her boots were worn. Her coat had been patched so many times that little of the original fabric remained. Snow covered her long chestnut hair. Her fingers were red from the freezing air. Her name was Elena. At only 20 years old, she was already known as the weakest omega in her pack. Every morning before sunrise she collected firewood. Every afternoon she scrubbed floors. Every evening she cooked meals she was never allowed to eat first. She worked harder than anyone. Yet no one ever thanked her. Kindness had become her only treasure. As she walked, she quietly hummed a lullaby. It was the last song her mother had ever sung. Whenever the world felt too cruel, Elena sang. The melody reminded her that gentle hearts could survive even the coldest winters. She smiled sadly. "I miss you, Mother." The wind answered. Then, she stopped walking. "Did I hear something?" The forest became silent again. Elena listened carefully. Nothing. She adjusted the firewood on her shoulders and took another step. Then the sound came again. A tiny cry. Barely louder than the wind. Most people would have ignored it. Elena couldn't. She placed the firewood gently beside a tree. "Please don't be another injured deer." She followed the sound deeper into the forest. Branches scratched her sleeves. Snow reached her knees. The cries became weaker. Hello." No answer. Only another soft whimper. Finally she reached the frozen ravine. Her eyes widened. Oh! There, beneath cracked ice and broken branches, lay the tiny wolf cub. His breathing was shallow. Blood stained the snow around him. His frightened eyes lifted toward her. For a brief second, they simply looked at each other. The cub tried to growl. Instead, only a weak cry escaped. Elena's heart broke. "Oh, little one." She slowly knelt near the edge. "You've been here all alone." The cub trembled harder. She noticed something else. The ice beneath him continued to crack. If she waited, the freezing river would pull him underneath. She looked around. No one. No help. Only endless snow. She whispered to herself, "I have to do something." Without another thought, she climbed carefully into the freezing ravine. The icy water reached her knees instantly. The cold felt like knives cutting through her skin. She gasped. But she kept moving. One careful step after another. The cracked ice shifted beneath her boots. A loud crack echoed. She froze. The cub whimpered, "I'm coming." Another step. Another crack. Finally she reached him. The heavy branch pinning his leg was frozen beneath solid ice. Elena pushed with both hands. Nothing. She tried again. Still nothing. Her arms shook. She planted both feet and pushed with every bit of strength she had. The branch finally rolled away. The cub collapsed weakly into the snow. "There you go." She smiled gently. "You did so well." Very carefully, she lifted him into her arms. She expected teeth, claws, fear. Instead, the tiny cub rested his head against her shoulder. His shaking slowly eased. His breathing became calmer. Elena blinked. "You trust me?" The little wolf looked into her eyes, then quietly buried his face against her chest. As if he had finally found safety, a tear rolled down Elena's cheek. No one should ever be this scared. She wrapped her coat around the cub. His fur was soaked. His body was dangerously cold. She rubbed his ears gently to warm him. "It's all right. You're safe now. I won't leave you." The cub closed his eyes. But he still trembled. Elena remembered something. "My mother always sang whenever I was afraid." She smiled through tears. "I hope you don't mind." Very softly, she began singing. The old lullaby floated through the snowy forest like warm light breaking through endless winter. Her voice wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It carried kindness. It carried comfort. It carried home. Something incredible happened. The cub's trembling slowed. His breathing became steady. His frightened ears relaxed. His tiny heartbeat no longer raced. Within moments, the exhausted little wolf had fallen asleep in her arms. Elena looked down in surprise. "You really were frightened." She brushed a snowflake from his forehead. "You don't have to be brave anymore. I'll stay until you wake." Neither of them noticed that they were no longer alone. High above the ravine, standing silently on a snow-covered cliff, a tall man watched everything. His black cloak moved with the wind. Snow settled across his broad shoulders. His face remained calm, unreadable. Golden eyes never left the girl below. Beside him stood several royal guards. None dared speak. Finally one guard whispered, "Your Majesty. Should we retrieve Prince Orion?" The man's deep voice remained quiet. "No." The guard looked confused. "But, the cub. He is safe." Another guard frowned. "That Omega could be dangerous." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "No." There was absolute certainty in his voice. She had every chance to walk away. She chose compassion. Silence returned. The Alpha King continued watching. He had seen warriors hesitate. He had seen hunters abandon his son. He had seen fear defeat courage. But this fragile Omega, this girl with worn boots and trembling hands, had walked into freezing water without thinking about herself. Not because she expected a reward. Not because she knew the cub was royal. Simply because someone needed help. 4 years. His son had trusted no stranger. Not one. Yet now, the little prince slept peacefully against the heart of an unknown Omega. Something deep inside Kael shifted. A feeling he had buried long ago quietly stirred. Respect. Curiosity. Hope. He had ruled kingdoms through strength. But today, he had witnessed a different kind of power. The kind that could never be forced. The kind born only from kindness. Below, Elena carefully adjusted her coat around the sleeping cub. She smiled softly. I suppose your family must be worried. When you wake up, we'll find your home. Kael heard every word. His expression softened almost invisibly. Then, he stepped forward from the shadows. One foot touched the snowy cliff. He could reveal himself. He could thank her. He could end the mystery immediately. Instead, he stopped. His golden eyes remained fixed on the young Omega. No, he murmured. Not yet. The guards looked at one another. Kael turned away. I want to know who she truly is. As the snow continued falling over the silent forest, neither Elena nor the sleeping wolf cub realized that destiny had already begun to change. And somewhere beyond the trees, the Alpha King disappeared into the storm, leaving behind only footprints that the falling snow quickly erased. The first light of dawn slowly crept over the frozen mountains. The snowstorm had finally begun to weaken, but the northern kingdom remained buried beneath a blanket of white. Frost clung to every branch, and thin ribbons of mist drifted through the silent forest. Elena opened her eyes with a start. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she felt a warm weight resting against her chest. The little wolf cub was still asleep, curled tightly inside her patched coat. His tiny breaths rose and fell in a peaceful rhythm. A gentle smile touched her lips. So, you made it through the night. Carefully, she checked the wound on his leg. The bleeding had stopped. She had wrapped it with strips torn from the sleeve of her only winter dress. It wasn't much, but it had worked. You are stronger than you think, she whispered. The cub slowly blinked awake. His bright blue eyes met hers. Instead of fear, they held trust. He stretched his tiny paws and let out a small yawn before licking Elena's hand. She laughed softly. Good morning. The cub wagged his little tail. For just a few seconds, the cruel world outside seemed to disappear. It was only a lonely Omega. And a grateful little wolf. But reality returned quickly. I have to go back, Elena sighed. If I'm late again. She didn't finish the sentence. She already knew what would happen. More insults. More punishment. More work. Still, she gently picked up the cub and carried him toward the edge of the forest. I think your family will come looking for you. The little wolf whined. I know. She stroked behind his ears. I don't want to leave you either. When they reached the place where the forest met the open valley, Elena knelt down. This is as far as I can take you. She carefully placed him on the snow. The cub refused to move. Instead, he walked straight back to her. His tiny nose pressed against her knee. Elena smiled sadly. No, you belong with your family. She pointed toward the forest. Go. The cub looked at her, then toward the trees, then back at her again. His little ears drooped. You'll be okay. She kissed the top of his head. I promise. Reluctantly, the cub finally turned and disappeared between the snowy pines. Elena watched until she could no longer see him. Something inside her suddenly felt empty. Goodbye, little one. She picked up her forgotten bundle of firewood and began the long walk back to Greystone Pack Village. By the time she reached the village gates, the sun had barely risen. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children chased each other through the snow. Warriors laughed near the training grounds. Life continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. No one knew she had saved a life. No one cared. An older Omega spotted her first. There she is. Another woman folded her arms. Late again. Before Elena could explain, the packhouse steward marched toward her. His face was hard as stone. Where have you been? I found an injured. I didn't ask for excuses. He threw a wooden bucket at her feet. The bucket landed with a loud crack. The training yard is filthy. Clean every inch before noon. Elena quietly lowered her head. Yes, sir. The steward frowned. And after that, wash the warrior's clothes. Then prepare tonight's meal. If you fail. He stepped closer. You won't eat. Without another word, he walked away. Elena simply picked up the bucket. She didn't argue. She never did. Years of being treated like she was invisible had taught her something. Some people only became louder when kindness answered anger. She preferred silence. As she carried water across the icy yard, laughter echoed behind her. A group of young warriors watched her struggle. One of them smirked. Look. The weak Omega is carrying more water than she can lift. Another laughed. Careful. She might cry. A third shook his head. I don't know why the Alpha lets useless Omegas stay. They're nothing but extra mouths to feed. The group burst into laughter. Elena paused for only a second. Then continued walking. Their words still hurt. They always would. But she refused to let bitterness live inside her heart. She quietly whispered the same words her mother had once told her. Kindness is never weakness. She repeated them like a prayer, even when no one else believed them. Hours passed. The cold water numbed her hands. Her knees ached from scrubbing frozen stone. Sweat mixed with melting snow across her forehead. Still, the yard slowly became spotless. She smiled to herself. There. At least something beautiful came from today. Suddenly, a familiar sound reached her ears. A happy bark. She froze. No. Another bark. Closer this time. She slowly turned around. Her eyes widened. Running across the snowy village road. Sliding awkwardly over the ice. Tail wagging wildly. Was the little wolf cub. You. The cub ran straight toward her. Without slowing down. He leaped into her arms. Elena barely caught him. Oh! She laughed as he covered her face with excited little licks. What are you doing here? You were supposed to go home. The cub answered with another playful bark. He curled happily against her chest as if he had finally found the place he belonged. The entire training yard became silent. Every warrior stopped moving. Buckets dropped. Training swords lowered. One whispered, "Is that?" Another stared in disbelief. A royal wolf. The steward stepped forward. Impossible. A hunter slowly approached. I've seen that silver marking before. His voice trembled. That cub belongs to the Alpha King's bloodline. Silence spread through the village. Every eye turned toward Elena. One woman gasped. Why is he with her? Another whispered. He looks happy. The cub rubbed his head against Elena's shoulder. His little tail refused to stop wagging. One child smiled. He likes her. A warrior frowned. No. Royal wolves don't trust strangers. Especially not Omegas. Questions filled the air. Did she steal him? No. Did she tame him? Impossible. Then why? No one had an answer. Elena looked around nervously. I found him injured yesterday. I only wanted to help. The steward's expression hardened. You expect us to believe that? Before Elena could answer, the cub growled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. But it was enough. Every warrior instinctively stepped backward. Protectively, the little wolf stood between Elena and the steward. The steward's face turned pale. He's protecting her. The whispers grew louder. Across the village, windows opened. More people gathered. Soon nearly everyone had come to witness the unbelievable sight. Far away, hidden among snow-covered trees overlooking the village, several riders had already arrived. Each wore black armor marked with the royal crest. At their center sat a massive black horse. Upon it rode the Alpha King. Kael remained completely still. His golden eyes watched the village below. Beside him, Commander Darius spoke quietly. We should retrieve the prince immediately. Kael didn't answer. Darius continued. The longer he stays there, the greater the risk. Still, Kael watched. Below, Elena knelt beside Orion. She brushed snow from his fur. You shouldn't frighten everyone. The cub looked up at her innocently. She smiled. "You're causing quite a bit of trouble." The little prince answered by placing one tiny paw in her hand. Kael's eyes softened. There was no fear. No forced obedience. Only trust. Something that could never be commanded. Only earned. Another royal guard whispered, "Should we reveal ourselves now?" Kael slowly shook his head. "No." The guard looked surprised. "My king. I want to see who she is. When she believes no one important is watching." Below them, an elderly woman stepped toward Elena. "Child. What exactly did you do?" Elena looked confused. "I didn't do anything. I only couldn't leave him alone." The old woman stared at her, then smiled faintly. "Sometimes. The greatest things begin with those exact words." Meanwhile, far beyond the village, inside the towering royal palace, a beautiful woman stood beside a crystal window. She wore a silver gown trimmed with white fur. A jeweled crown rested elegantly upon her dark hair. Her beauty was impossible to ignore, but so was the coldness in her eyes. Luna Selene, the acting Luna of the Northern Kingdom. A royal servant hurried into the room. "My lady." She barely looked up. "What is it?" "The young prince has been found." Selene smiled. "Good. Bring him home." The servant hesitated. "There is another matter." Her smile disappeared. "What matter?" The servant swallowed nervously. "The prince refuses to leave a village Omega." Silence. Selene slowly turned. "What?" "The villagers say." He followed her willingly. "They claim he trusts her." For a long moment, Selene said nothing. Then, her fingers tightened around the jeweled goblet in her hand. A sharp crack echoed through the room. The crystal shattered. Red wine spilled across the white floor like fresh blood. Her eyes became dangerously cold. "Who is she?" The servant lowered his head. "Her name is Elena." "An Omega servant." Selene repeated the name quietly. "Elena." Something dark flashed across her face. "No Omega will ever become important in this kingdom." Back in the snowy village, Elena continued holding the happy little cub, completely unaware that her simple act of kindness had already reached the royal palace. She believed this was only another difficult day. She had no idea. Powerful eyes had begun watching every step she took. And high above the village, the Alpha King finally spoke. His deep voice carried calmly through the frozen air. "Do not interfere." Every royal guard lowered his head. Kael never looked away from Elena. "I want to know who she truly is." Below, the little wolf cub happily rested in Elena's arms. Above, destiny quietly tightened its invisible threads. Neither of them knew that this was only the beginning. Morning settled gently over grey stone pack village, but peace did not. The snow that had fallen through the night covered every rooftop in white, hiding the cracks in old buildings and the footprints left by those who had risen before dawn. From a distance, the village looked beautiful. Up close, it was a place where kindness was often mistaken for weakness. Elena stood in the center of the training yard with a wooden bucket in her hands while the little silver wolf cub happily followed her from one chore to the next. She tried sweeping the snow from the stone paths. The cub chased the broom. She carried fresh water from the frozen well. The cub bounced beside her, splashing his tiny paws through the snow. She stacked chopped firewood outside the kitchen. The cub proudly dragged a stick nearly twice his size, determined to help. Despite everything, Elena couldn't stop smiling. "You really don't give up, do you?" she asked softly. The cub barked proudly. She laughed, a sound so rare that even she seemed surprised by it. For the first time in many years, her heart felt lighter. But not everyone shared her happiness. Across the yard, warriors whispered among themselves. "This isn't normal. That cub refuses to leave her. I've never seen anything like it." An older hunter folded his arms. "Royal wolves choose with instinct. They don't trust without reason." Another warrior frowned. Then why choose an omega? No one could answer. The mystery only grew deeper. Far beyond the village, royal soldiers searched every road leading from the forbidden forest. Commander Darius rode at their front, his black horse cutting through fresh snow. "We know he's here," he said firmly. "The prince's scent leads directly to this village." One young guard asked nervously, "What if someone kidnapped him?" Darius shook his head. "No. If that were true, the entire valley would already smell of fear." He knew the Alpha King well. Kael would have torn the kingdom apart if anyone had harmed his son. Instead, His Majesty had remained strangely calm. Almost curious. Darius found that more unsettling than anger. "Spread out," he ordered. "No one harms the prince." Inside the palace, Lunar Selene stood before an enormous mirror while servants adjusted the silver embroidery on her royal gown. She hardly noticed them. Her thoughts remained fixed on one name. Elena. An ordinary omega. A nobody. Yet somehow, Prince Orion had chosen her company over everyone else. Even over the palace guards who had protected him since birth. Selene slowly removed a sapphire ring from her finger. Then she squeezed it so tightly her knuckles turned white. "This changes nothing," she whispered. "I will become queen." One maid accidentally met her eyes through the mirror. Selene smiled politely. The smile never reached her eyes. "Prepare my carriage. We're visiting Greystone Village." Back in the village, Elena knelt beside Orion. She gently replaced the bandage around his injured leg. "There. Much better." The cub licked her fingers. "You really like doing that." He answered with another playful bark. Nearby, several village children watched from behind a fence. One little girl stepped closer. "Miss Elena." Elena smiled warmly. "Yes. Can I pet him?" The little girl looked nervous. Elena glanced at Orion. "What do you think?" The cub happily wagged his tail. The child slowly reached out. Orion rubbed against her tiny hand. Her eyes sparkled. "He's so soft." Soon more children gathered. Within minutes, Orion was happily rolling through the snow while children laughed around him. The sound spread across the village. For years, no one had heard laughter like this. Even tired workers stopped to watch. An elderly baker smiled. "That girl brings peace wherever she goes." Another woman quietly nodded. "I never noticed before. She always helps everyone. And never asks for anything." Some people began seeing Elena differently. Others did not. The steward walked toward her with an angry expression. "What is this?" Elena immediately stood. "I'm sorry. The children only wanted." "I don't care." He pointed toward Orion. "Get that beast away from here." The children gasped. Elena gently stepped in front of the cub. "He isn't hurting anyone." "I don't care," the steward repeated coldly. "This is a working village. Not a playground." He reached toward Orion. Before his hand could touch the little cub, a low growl echoed through the yard. Orion stepped back beside Elena. His tiny body trembled. Not with fear, but with determination. Elena immediately knelt. "No, we don't growl." She softly stroked his head. "It's all right. He doesn't understand." The cub looked at her, then slowly relaxed. Everyone watching fell silent. The steward stared in disbelief. He listened. An old hunter whispered. She calmed him with one touch. The mystery deepened. At that very moment, the sound of horses echoed through the village. Heavy, powerful, steady. Every warrior immediately turned. Royal banners appeared through the falling snow. Black armor reflected the pale winter light. Commander Darius rode into the village first. Behind him came 12 elite royal guards. The villagers quickly bowed. The royal guard. They found him. Elena slowly stood, holding Orion close. The cub looked toward the arriving soldiers. Instead of running to them, he buried his face against Elena's shoulder. Darius noticed immediately. His expression softened with relief. Prince Orion. One guard stepped forward. My prince. He carefully reached toward the cub. Orion whined. The guard lifted him gently. For 1 second. Everything seemed fine. Then, Orion began crying. Not small whimpers. Heartbreaking cries. He twisted in the guard's arms, desperately reaching toward Elena. His tiny paws stretched toward her. He howled. The sound pierced every heart in the village. The guard looked embarrassed. I've never seen him like this. Another tried. The crying became louder. A third warrior attempted. Orion refused. He fought to return. His frightened eyes searched only one person. Elena. Commander Darius frowned. What happened to him? One elderly villager quietly answered. He doesn't want anyone else. Darius slowly looked toward Elena. Come here. She hesitated. I don't know if I should. It's an order. Elena carefully stepped forward. She knelt beside the crying cub. Orion. The little wolf immediately stopped struggling. His ears lifted. His tail wagged. He reached both tiny paws toward her. Elena gently took him into her arms. Instantly. Silence. The crying ended. The little prince sighed happily and rested against her chest. The entire village stood frozen. Even the royal guard stared. Commander Darius whispered under his breath. Impossible. A royal wolf, the heir to the Northern Kingdom, had chosen the weakest Omega over every trained warrior in the realm. None of them could explain it. None of them understood it. But someone else did. High on the snowy ridge overlooking the village, a lone figure stood beside a black horse. The Alpha King had arrived. Unlike his guards, he had remained hidden. Golden eyes silently observed the unbelievable scene unfolding below. His son, who had refused every comfort since losing his mother, had finally found peace. Not in a palace. Not beside warriors. Not among nobles. But in the gentle embrace of an Omega who believed she was worth nothing. Kael closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, something inside him had changed. He no longer watched Elena out of curiosity. Now, he watched her with growing respect. Below, Elena gently stroked Orion's fur. There now. You'll be all right. You should go home. The little cub looked up at her. He understood none of her words. Yet somehow, he understood her heart. And for reasons no prophecy had yet revealed. His own heart had already chosen her. The entire village stood frozen. Not because of the snow. Not because the royal guards had arrived. But because the young prince of the Northern Kingdom refused to leave the arms of the weakest Omega anyone had ever known. Commander Darius had fought beside the Alpha King for nearly 20 years. He had seen kings fall. He had seen rogue Alphas bow before Kael. He had watched Prince Orion reject every nurse, every healer, and every warrior after the death of his mother. Yet now, the little prince rested peacefully against Elena's chest as though he had known her his entire life. The commander slowly removed his gloves. His voice was calm. Miss Elena. She looked up nervously. Why yes. I need you to hand the prince to me. Elena nodded immediately. Of course. She gently kissed the top of Orion's head. There now. You've caused enough trouble today. The cub looked into her eyes. His tiny ears lowered. It's time to go home. Very carefully, she placed him into Commander Darius's arms. For a heartbeat, everything seemed fine. Then Orion realized she was letting him go. A heartbreaking cry burst from his tiny chest. He struggled wildly. His small paws reached toward Elena. His eyes filled with panic. No. Elena whispered. Please don't cry. The cub howled louder. Villagers lowered their heads. Several women wiped tears from their eyes. One little girl whispered. He thinks she's leaving forever. Commander Darius gently rocked the prince. It's all right, little one. But Orion only cried harder. One royal healer stepped forward. My commander. Perhaps I should examine him. Darius nodded. The healer checked the cub carefully. No fever. No injury. He simply. The healer looked toward Elena. Doesn't want to be separated from her. Silence settled over the crowd. The answer sounded impossible. Yet everyone had witnessed it. Darius finally sighed. Miss Elena. She stepped forward. Yes. Would you hold him again? She hesitated. If His Majesty allows. A deep voice suddenly echoed across the village. I allow it. Every person turned instantly. The crowd parted. Royal guards bowed their heads. Snow drifted quietly through the air as a tall man walked forward with slow, confident steps. He wore a long black cloak trimmed with white wolf fur. A silver crown rested upon dark hair dusted with snow. Golden eyes reflected the winter light. Power seemed to surround him without effort. Every warrior immediately dropped to one knee. The Alpha King. His Majesty. Even the wind seemed to grow quieter. Elena stared at him in shock. Her heart began pounding. She quickly lowered her head. My king. Kael stopped only a few steps away. He looked first at Orion. Then at Elena. His expression remained calm. Unreadable. You may take him. Elena carefully accepted the cub. The moment Orion touched her arms, his crying stopped. Instantly, the little prince sighed with relief and tucked his head beneath her chin. The silence that followed felt even louder than the crying had. Several guards exchanged stunned glances. One whispered. It happened again. Kael noticed every detail. Not just the prince's calm breathing. Not just the relaxed ears. But Elena herself. She wasn't smiling proudly. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply whispered softly to the frightened cub. I'm here. You're safe. Those 3 words reached Kael more deeply than he expected. 4 years. No one had spoken to his son with such simple kindness. Not because they feared punishment. Not because they hoped for reward. Only because they cared. Kael spoke quietly. What is your name? Elena swallowed. Elena. Your Majesty. You found him yesterday. Yes. You knew he belonged to the royal family. She quickly shook her head. No. I thought he was only a frightened little wolf. And if he had been an ordinary cub? Elena looked surprised by the question. I would have helped him the same way. No hesitation. No performance. Only honesty. Kael held her gaze for several seconds. He believed her. Around them, the villagers waited nervously. No one dared breathe too loudly. Finally Kael asked. Why? Elena blinked. My king. Why risk your life? The river was freezing. The ice was breaking. You could have died. Elena looked down at Orion sleeping peacefully in her arms. A small smile appeared. Because he was afraid. She shrugged gently. And no child should face fear alone. The entire village fell silent. Even the soldiers looked away for a moment. Those simple words carried more strength than any battle speech. Kael had questioned countless warriors. None had ever answered him like that. His voice became softer. You expected no reward. She looked genuinely confused. There was never anything to reward. I only did what anyone should do. Behind Kael, Commander Darius almost smiled. Anyone should do. Yet no one else had. Kael slowly stepped closer. Close enough to see the frost covering Elena's sleeves. Close enough to notice the torn fabric wrapped around Orion's injured leg. He recognized it immediately. It was part of her own dress. You used your clothing. She looked embarrassed. I didn't have proper bandages. The bleeding wouldn't stop. So? She laughed nervously. I suppose dresses can be replaced. But lives cannot. Kael remained silent. Something inside his chest tightened. How long had it been since someone had reminded him what true kindness looked like? Years. Too many years. Suddenly, Orion opened his sleepy blue eyes. He looked from Elena to Kael, then happily reached one tiny paw toward his father. Kael gently touched it. The cub immediately grabbed both Kael's finger and Elena's hand. His little tail wagged happily. The villagers smiled. One elderly woman quietly whispered, "He wants them together." Elena's cheeks turned pink. She gently pulled her hand back. I'm sorry." Kael looked down at his son. For the first time that morning, the Alpha King's lips formed the faintest smile. It lasted only a second, but everyone saw it. Commander Darius nearly forgot to breathe. His king, who had barely smiled since Queen Lyra's death, had smiled because of an Omega. Far away, a royal carriage stopped outside the village gates. Silk curtains moved aside. Lunar Selene stepped out gracefully. She expected cheering, respect, admiration. Instead, every villager was looking toward the Alpha King, toward Elena, toward Prince Orion. Confused, Selene walked closer. Then she saw it. The prince sitting peacefully in Elena's arms. Kael standing beside her. And that tiny smile. Selene's heart filled with cold fury. What is this? The crowd immediately bowed. "My lady." Selene ignored them. Her sharp eyes remained fixed on Elena. "So, this is the Omega." She walked slowly around Elena, studying her patched clothes, worn boots, and tired face. "This servant." Her voice carried quiet contempt. Commander Darius spoke respectfully. "My lady, the prince refuses to leave her." Selene laughed once. A short, cold laugh. Ridiculous. She stepped closer. "Give me the prince." Elena carefully extended Orion. "My lady." But before Selene could touch him, the little cub growled. Not loudly, not violently, just enough. His tiny body pressed tightly against Elena again. He buried his face in her shoulder. Refusing. Selene froze. Embarrassment flashed across her face. Hundreds of eyes watched. A prince had rejected the acting Luna. In public. For an Omega. Selene forced another smile. He's simply confused. But deep inside, jealousy had already begun to burn. Kael watched the entire exchange. He understood more than anyone realized. His son trusted instincts beyond reason. And Orion had made his choice. Kael finally spoke. "Elena." She looked up immediately. "Yes, Your Majesty. I have a request." She bowed. "If I am able." "My son trusts you." "He has not trusted anyone since his mother's passing." He paused. "I would ask you to come to the royal palace." The entire village gasped. Elena stared at him. I don't belong in a palace." "This is not about belonging." Kael answered calmly. "It is about Orion." The little prince looked up at Elena with hopeful blue eyes. He softly licked her hand. Her heart melted. She looked down at him, then back toward the king. She still didn't know her answer, but deep inside, she felt that saying yes would change her life forever. And standing only a few steps away, Lunar Selene silently made a promise. "If that Omega enters my palace, I will make sure she never leaves with her dignity." The snow continued to fall. The prince slept peacefully. The Alpha King had extended his hand, and destiny had opened a door that could never again be closed. The journey to the royal palace should have filled Elena with wonder. Instead, it filled her with fear. The royal carriage moved slowly across the snow-covered mountain road. Thick pine forests stretched endlessly on both sides, while frozen rivers shimmered beneath the pale winter sun. Inside the carriage, Elena sat quietly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across from her, Prince Orion slept peacefully with his head resting on her knees. Every few moments, the little cub let out a content sigh, as if he feared she might disappear if he slept too deeply. Elena gently stroked the soft silver fur between his ears. "I'll stay until we arrive," she whispered. Outside the carriage rode dozens of elite royal guards. At their center, Alpha King Kael rode his great black stallion. He could have traveled inside the warm carriage. Instead, he remained outside with his warriors. Always watching. Always protecting. Commander Darius guided his horse beside the king's. "You've surprised the entire kingdom today, Your Majesty." Kael kept his eyes on the road. "Have I? You invited an unknown Omega into the palace. The court will object. They always object." Darius smiled faintly. Lady Selene most of all. Kael's expression remained unreadable. "My decision concerns my son. No one else." The commander nodded. He had expected that answer. Yet something about the king's voice felt different. Less distant. Less cold. For the first time in years. There was hope hidden beneath his calm words. Inside the carriage, Orion slowly opened one sleepy eye. He immediately looked toward Elena. Seeing her still beside him, his tiny tail wagged against the seat. "You're awake." The cub answered with a happy little bark. "You've slept almost the whole journey." He stretched lazily before climbing into her lap once again. Elena laughed. "You certainly enjoy being carried." Orion nudged her hand until she scratched behind his ears. "You are very spoiled." The cub barked proudly, as if agreeing. The sound made Elena smile again. Then, her smile slowly faded. She looked through the carriage window toward the distant mountains. "Mother, I wish you were here." She remembered the tiny wooden cabin where they had once lived. Her mother's gentle voice. Her warm hands. The lullaby that always chased nightmares away. Everything had changed after her mother's death. The pack no longer saw Elena as someone's beloved daughter. Only as another servant. Another Omega. Another person to order around. A quiet tear slipped down her cheek. Before she could wipe it away, a soft wet nose touched her hand. Orion looked up at her with worried blue eyes. "I'm all right." She smiled through the sadness. "I promise." The cub rested his tiny head against her arm. As if saying, "You don't have to cry alone." Hours later, the royal palace appeared beyond the snowy hills. Elena's breath caught. It was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Massive white stone walls rose high into the winter sky. Silver towers glittered beneath sunlight. Royal banners danced in the wind. Frozen waterfalls surrounded beautiful gardens where enormous white wolves rested peacefully. Hundreds of guards stood at attention. Servants hurried through the grand entrance. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked impossible. The carriage stopped. A servant opened the door. "We have arrived." Elena stepped onto the snow carefully. Her worn boots looked painfully out of place against the polished stone courtyard. She instinctively brushed snow from her old cloak. Suddenly she felt embarrassed. Everyone around her wore elegant clothing. She wore patched sleeves. Everyone else belonged. She did not. Kael dismounted from his horse. Without saying a word, he walked toward the palace entrance. Halfway there, he noticed Elena had stopped walking. She remained frozen near the carriage, looking at the enormous palace, looking at herself. Kael understood immediately. He turned back. "Elena." She quickly lowered her head. "My king. You are not expected to impress anyone here." She looked surprised. He continued calmly. "You were invited because my son trusts you. Nothing else matters." Those simple words eased something inside her heart. She nodded softly. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Orion happily jumped from the carriage and ran circles around Elena's feet, almost as if encouraging her forward. She laughed quietly. "I suppose you're telling me to stop being afraid." The cub barked once. Kael almost smiled again. Inside the palace, news of Elena's arrival spread faster than wildfire. Servants whispered in every hallway. "She's here. The Omega. The one who saved the prince. I heard His Majesty personally invited her." "Impossible. It must be temporary. I heard the prince refuses to eat without her." Rumors multiplied with every passing minute. Some admired her. Others doubted her. But no one ignored her. Meanwhile, Selene stood inside the royal hall, surrounded by noblewomen dressed in silk and jewels. One lady smiled politely. "My lady. The servant has arrived." Selene calmly placed her teacup onto its silver tray. So she accepted. Another noblewoman laughed. "She probably dreams of becoming a princess." The room filled with soft laughter. Selene smiled gracefully. "Do not underestimate desperate people. Sometimes they mistake kindness for opportunity." A maid quietly approached. "My lady. His Majesty wishes the Omega to stay in the East Guest Wing." The smile disappeared from Selene's face. "The Guest Wing?" "Yes. Near the Prince's chambers." Silence. One noblewoman whispered. "That area is reserved for honored guests." Selene slowly stood. "So, she enters my home as an honored guest." Her voice remained calm. Too calm. The women around her recognized the danger immediately. Whenever Selene spoke so softly, someone always suffered. Elena followed a palace servant through endless hallways. Everything amazed her. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light. Paintings of ancient Alpha Kings covered the walls. Fresh flowers filled the corridors despite the harsh winter outside. She had never imagined such beauty. The servant smiled kindly. "Your room is this way." "My room?" "Yes. I don't need one. I could sleep near the kitchens." The servant blinked in surprise. "His Majesty ordered that you receive proper accommodations." Elena lowered her eyes. "No one has ever." She stopped herself. "No one has ever what?" the servant asked gently. Elena smiled sadly. "No one has ever prepared a room just for me." The servant's heart ached. She quietly opened the door. Elena stepped inside. The room was beautiful. A warm fireplace burned softly. Clean blankets rested upon a large bed. Fresh winter flowers stood beside the window. A wooden wardrobe waited in one corner. She slowly touched the soft blanket. Almost afraid it wasn't real. Is all this for me?" The servant nodded. "Welcome to the royal palace." Elena closed her eyes for a moment. Not because of luxury, but because, for the first time in years, she felt seen. Suddenly, a loud bark echoed through the hallway. Before anyone could react, Orion burst through the open door. He ran straight toward Elena and leaped into her arms. She laughed. "There you are. Weren't you supposed to stay with your father?" The cub happily licked her cheek. Behind him stood Kael. His deep voice filled the doorway. He escaped 3 guards. Commander Darius sighed dramatically. The prince appears to have chosen his favorite person. Elena looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry." Kael gently shook his head. "There is nothing to apologize for." He watched Orion curl comfortably against her shoulder. For the first time since his mother's death, the little prince looked completely at peace. Kael silently made another decision. One that would soon change everything. Because if Elena's presence could heal his son, then she would remain in the palace. No matter who objected. And somewhere else within those grand stone walls, Selene stood at her window, watching Elena from a distance. Her beautiful face revealed nothing. But inside, jealousy had already begun turning into something far more dangerous. Hatred. She whispered coldly to herself. "You may have entered this palace today, but I will make certain you leave it in disgrace." The first evening inside the royal palace felt like stepping into another world. Warm golden light danced across polished marble floors. Large fireplaces filled every hallway with comforting heat. Outside, snow continued to fall over the kingdom. Inside, everything was peaceful. At least, it seemed that way. Elena stood quietly near the window of her guest room, watching snowflakes drift through the dark sky. She still couldn't believe she was here. Yesterday she had been scrubbing frozen stone floors in Greystone Village. Today, she was sleeping inside the palace of the Alpha King. "It doesn't feel real," she whispered. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Before she could answer, the door slowly opened. Prince Orion rushed inside. His little tail wagged wildly as he jumped into her arms. Elena laughed warmly. "There you are again. You've escaped the guards twice today." Orion proudly barked, as if escaping had become a game. A palace maid hurried into the room a moment later, completely out of breath. "I'm so sorry." He slipped away again. Elena smiled. "It's all right. He only wanted company." The maid looked at the tiny prince with disbelief. "I've worked here for 4 years. I've never seen him this happy." She hesitated before asking quietly, "What did you do?" Elena looked confused. "I don't understand." "To earn his trust." Elena gently scratched behind Orion's ears. "I didn't earn anything. I only stayed with him when he was afraid." The maid stared at her for several seconds, then smiled. Perhaps that was enough. At the same time, inside the king's private study, Commander Darius stood before Kael. A fire crackled softly between them. Darius unfolded several reports. "The Palace Council has questions." Kael looked up from an old map. "They always have questions. They're concerned about the Omega. They believe bringing her here will create rumors." Kael calmly closed the map. "My son has eaten today." Darius blinked. He refused breakfast. He refused lunch. But after Elena arrived, he finished every meal. Silence filled the room. Kael finally spoke. "My responsibility is not to silence rumors. It is to protect my son." The commander nodded respectfully. "There is another matter. Lady Selene has requested a private audience." Kael sighed almost silently. "Tomorrow." Elsewhere, Luna Selene sat alone inside her luxurious chamber. A crystal glass rested untouched beside her. Her eyes remained fixed on the fireplace. She was thinking, planning. A knock echoed. "Enter." A young servant hurried inside. "My lady. I watched the Omega as you ordered." Selene looked up. "Tell me." "The prince follows her everywhere. He refused dinner until she sat beside him. He even fell asleep beside her chair." The servant hesitated. And. The king smiled. Selene's eyes became dangerously cold. "Explain." "I only saw it for a moment. But." He smiled while watching them together. Silence. The servant lowered her head. She suddenly regretted speaking. Without warning, the crystal glass shattered in Selene's hand. Wine dripped between her fingers. She didn't even seem to notice. "Leave." The servant rushed out immediately. When the door closed, Selene whispered through clenched teeth, "I have waited 3 years. I stood beside that throne. I earned everyone's respect. And now, an Omega threatens everything." Her beautiful face hardened. "If kindness brought her into this palace, I will use cruelty to send her away." The next morning, Elena woke before sunrise. Old habits were difficult to forget. She quietly made her bed, folded every blanket, swept the floor, organized the room. When the palace maid arrived, she stared in shock. You cleaned everything." Elena smiled nervously. "I hope I didn't do something wrong." The maid laughed. "No. You are our guest. You weren't supposed to do any work." Elena looked embarrassed. "I've never been a guest before." The maid's smile slowly disappeared. For some reason, those words broke her heart. Soon afterward, Elena followed another servant toward the royal nursery. As soon as Orion saw her, he ran across the room with excited little barks. He almost knocked over a chair trying to reach her. "There you are." She laughed as she picked him up. "I've missed you too." Nearby stood 3 royal tutors. One elderly scholar whispered, "This is extraordinary." Another nodded. The prince hasn't attended lessons peacefully in months. As Elena sat beside him, Orion quietly listened. No crying. No running away. No tantrums. Simply calm. The tutors exchanged amazed glances. One quietly murmured, "She calms him without trying." High above the nursery, Kael observed from the open balcony, hidden from sight. He watched Elena patiently encourage Orion to identify shapes carved into wooden blocks. "What shape is this?" The cub tapped it happily. "A square." He barked proudly. She laughed. "I think that means yes." Kael realized something important. She never treated Orion like a prince. She treated him like a child. Someone who needed love. Not perfection. That difference mattered. More than anyone realized. Commander Darius quietly joined him. "You've been watching for nearly an hour." Kael answered honestly. "I know." "What are you looking for?" Kael remained silent for several moments. Finally, "The truth." "And have you found it?" Kael looked down at Elena. "She has not pretended once." That afternoon, the palace gathered for tea inside the winter garden. Nobles dressed in silk walked among snow-covered roses protected beneath enchanted glass. Laughter filled the air. Music drifted through the garden. Elena felt completely out of place. She stood quietly near a fountain, hoping no one would notice her. Unfortunately, someone already had. Selene approached with several noblewomen behind her. Every step looked graceful. Every smile looked perfect. "My dear Elena." Elena bowed respectfully. "My lady." Selene looked her up and down. "The palace suits you surprisingly well." "Thank you. I only hope you remember." Selene smiled sweetly. "That guests eventually return home." The noblewomen laughed quietly. Elena lowered her eyes. "I never intended to stay longer than necessary." "Good." Selene replied. "Because royal life can be difficult. I would hate to see someone so fragile become overwhelmed." Before Elena could answer, Orion suddenly ran between them. The little prince stood directly in front of Elena. Protectively, he gave Selene a warning growl. The garden instantly fell silent. Every noble witnessed it. Selene's smile nearly disappeared. She forced herself to laugh. "He certainly enjoys playing." But everyone knew. That wasn't play. The prince was protecting Elena. Again. From across the garden, Kael witnessed everything. His expression darkened. He didn't miss the look in Selene's eyes, or the fear briefly crossing Elena's face. He understood. The palace was no longer simply welcoming a guest. It had become the beginning of a silent war. And somewhere deep within her chambers that evening, Selene began putting the first pieces of a dangerous plan into motion. She opened a velvet jewelry box. Inside rested the priceless Moonstone necklace, one of the kingdom's greatest treasures. A slow smile crossed her face. If the palace wishes to love an Omega, then first, they must learn to distrust her. She gently closed the lid. Outside, the winter wind howled against the palace walls. Inside, a trap had already begun. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of silver. Snow drifted gently across the towers of the royal palace, covering the gardens in a fresh blanket of white. From the outside, the kingdom looked peaceful. Inside, a dangerous plan had already been set into motion. Long before sunrise, Selene stood alone in a quiet corridor. The priceless Moonstone necklace rested inside a velvet pouch in her hands. It had belonged to generations of lunar queens. Every noble in the kingdom recognized it. Every servant feared even touching it. Selene smiled to herself. "Forgive me, old queen," she whispered. "But crowns are not kept through kindness." She looked toward the eastern guest wing. Toward Elena's room. "No one will question the word of a lunar over an Omega." A few minutes later, the palace was still asleep. Only a handful of servants walked the silent halls. One frightened maid approached Selene and bowed deeply. "My lady. You asked to see me." Selene handed her the velvet pouch. Take this. The maid carefully accepted it. My lady, this is the Moonstone necklace. I know. I want you to place it inside Elena's wardrobe. The young maid's face turned pale. I can't. Selene's smile disappeared. Can't. It is wrong. The maid's hands trembled. Miss Elena has done nothing. Selene slowly stepped closer. You have a younger brother, don't you? The maid froze. He works in the royal stables. Yes. It would be unfortunate if he suddenly lost his position. The servant's eyes filled with tears. My lady. I don't wish to hurt anyone. Then you know what to do. The maid lowered her head. I understand. With shaking hands, she disappeared down the hallway. Selene watched her leave. Not a trace of guilt crossed her face. Meanwhile, Elena had already begun her day. She stood in the royal nursery helping Orion eat breakfast. The little prince happily sat beside her, his tiny tail wagging whenever she smiled. A bowl of warm stew rested before him. Elena held up a wooden spoon. One more bite. Orion looked away dramatically. Oh. You've decided you don't like breakfast today. The cub crossed his tiny paws. Elena laughed. I see. So we're being stubborn. She looked around the room, then whispered loudly enough for Orion to hear. I suppose I'll have to eat it myself. Immediately, the little cub grabbed the spoon with both paws. Several servants burst into laughter. There he goes. I knew he'd fall for it. Orion proudly finished the bowl. Elena clapped softly. Well done. The cub barked happily before licking her hand. Across the room, Kael quietly watched from the doorway. He had arrived only moments earlier. Neither Elena nor Orion had noticed him. Commander Darius stood beside the king. I've never seen the prince finish breakfast so quickly. Kael nodded once. Neither have I. He noticed something else. Elena never demanded obedience. She earned cooperation through patience. It reminded him of someone. His late Luna had once possessed that same gentle strength. For the first time in years, the painful memory brought comfort instead of grief. Later that morning, the palace buzzed with unusual excitement. Servants rushed through hallways. Guards searched every corridor. Whispers spread from room to room. The Moonstone necklace is gone. What? It disappeared from Lady Selene's private chamber. Impossible. Every entrance was guarded. It must have been stolen. Within minutes, the entire palace knew. The priceless royal treasure had vanished. Elena had no idea. She spent the morning walking with Orion through the palace gardens. Fresh snow crunched beneath their feet. White birds fluttered across frozen trees. Orion chased snowflakes, trying to catch them with his tiny paws. You'll never catch all of them. The cub barked confidently. Oh. You think you can? He jumped high into the air, missed completely, then landed face first in a pile of soft snow. Elena laughed so hard tears filled her eyes. Oh, Orion. She helped him back onto his feet. Snow covered his nose. There. You look much fiercer now. The little prince proudly puffed out his chest. Behind them, several palace servants watched quietly. One elderly gardener smiled. Look at that. The prince laughs again. His wife nodded. The palace feels warmer these days. Another servant whispered. Perhaps hope has returned. None of them noticed. A pair of cold eyes watching from a distant balcony. Selene. She watched every smile, every laugh, every moment of happiness. Each one made her hatred grow stronger. By afternoon, royal guards knocked firmly on Elena's door. She opened it with a confused smile. Yes. The captain bowed respectfully. Miss Elena. His Majesty requests your presence in the royal court. My presence. Immediately. She glanced toward Orion. The little cub looked worried. She gently stroked his head. I'll come back soon. He whined softly. I promise. The great royal court was already full. Nobles lined both sides of the enormous hall. Royal advisors stood near towering marble columns. Warriors remained perfectly still. The atmosphere felt heavy, dangerously quiet. Elena stepped inside. Every eye turned toward her. She suddenly felt very small. At the far end of the hall sat Alpha King Kael upon the ancient throne. His expression remained calm, unreadable. Beside him stood Selene. Unlike Kael, she smiled. It was a smile Elena didn't understand. My king. Elena bowed deeply. You asked for me. Kael nodded. There has been an incident. She looked confused. I don't understand. Selene stepped forward gracefully. The royal Moonstone necklace has disappeared. Elena gasped. Oh. I'm very sorry. So are we. Selene answered smoothly. Which is why every chamber in the palace must be searched. Elena nodded without hesitation. Of course. You may search mine as well. Several nobles exchanged surprised looks. No fear. No excuses. Only simple agreement. Kael noticed. Selene noticed too. Neither spoke. The captain of the royal guard raised one hand. Search every room. At once, guards spread throughout the palace. The enormous hall fell silent. Only the sound of boots echoed through distant corridors. Minutes passed. No one spoke. Elena stood quietly, hands folded before her. She had nothing to hide. Or so she believed. Far away, inside her guest chamber, one nervous guard slowly opened the wooden wardrobe. His eyes widened. My commander. He reached inside carefully, then lifted something wrapped in deep blue velvet. The Moonstone necklace sparkled beneath the light. The guard's face turned white. He whispered, "We found it." The words echoed through the corridor. And at that exact moment, back inside the royal court, the massive doors slowly opened. Every person turned. The captain entered carrying the velvet cloth in both hands. Silence filled the hall. He knelt before the throne. My king. It was found. Kael's golden eyes lowered toward the glittering necklace. Then, slowly, they lifted toward Elena. She stared at the necklace in complete disbelief. Her lips parted. No. That's impossible. The court erupted into shocked whispers. And across the hall, Selene quietly smiled. Her trap had finally closed. The great royal court fell into complete silence. Every noble stared at the sparkling Moonstone necklace resting on the velvet cloth. It was unmistakable. The symbol of every lunar queen. The treasure that had been guarded for generations. And according to the royal guards, it had just been found inside Elena's room. Elena couldn't breathe. Her eyes remained fixed on the necklace. No. She whispered. There has to be a mistake. The captain lowered his head respectfully before the throne. My king, the necklace was recovered from the wardrobe inside Miss Elena's chamber. The words echoed through the massive hall like thunder. Almost instantly, whispers swept through the court. I knew it. An Omega cannot resist temptation. She pretended to be kind. She fooled the prince. How disgraceful. Each cruel word struck Elena harder than the last. She slowly shook her head. I didn't take it. Her voice trembled. I've never even seen that necklace before. No one answered. The nobles had already made up their minds. Selene stepped forward with perfect grace. Her expression showed practiced disappointment. Not anger. Not triumph. Only sadness. Also it appeared. My king. She bowed respectfully. I wished to believe she was innocent. She looked toward Elena with full sympathy. I truly did. Elena stared at her in disbelief. I didn't steal anything. Selene sighed softly. Then how do you explain the necklace being found in your room? I can't. Exactly. The courtroom grew even quieter. Selene turned toward the nobles. Our kingdom has always honored honesty, no matter a person's rank. But if we ignore theft simply because we feel pity, what example do we set? Several nobles nodded immediately. Lady Selene speaks wisely. Justice must be equal. Punishment must follow. Elena looked toward Kael. He had not spoken once. His golden eyes remained fixed on her. Not accusing. Not forgiving. Simply watching. She gathered her courage. My king. Kael answered calmly. Speak. I swear on my mother's memory. I did not steal that necklace. The court stirred. Everyone knew such an oath carried great weight. Kael's expression changed almost imperceptibly. He believed she believed her own words. But belief alone was not proof. Suddenly, the massive courtroom doors burst open. A familiar bark echoed through the hall. Prince Orion raced inside. 2 exhausted palace guards hurried after him. My king. We tried to stop him. The little cub ignored everyone. He ran straight toward Elena. Without hesitation, he stood in front of her. Protectively, his tiny body faced the nobles. A low growl rolled from his chest. The hall fell silent once again. One noble scoffed. Someone remove that animal. Before anyone moved, Orion growled louder. His blue eyes locked onto Selene. The acting Luna instinctively stepped backward. The prince had never behaved this way toward her before. Kael noticed. Every guard noticed. So did the entire court. Commander Darius quietly whispered. The prince senses something. One arrogant noble suddenly pointed toward Elena. She used the prince to gain access to the palace. Another added. She planned this from the beginning. Throw her into the dungeon. Make an example of her. Voices rose across the hall. Punish the thief. She deceived the king. She deceived us all. Orion barked angrily. He refused to leave Elena's side. The little cub pressed against her leg, as if shielding her from the hatred surrounding them. Elena gently rested one hand on his head. No, she whispered. It's all right. Her own eyes filled with tears. But don't be afraid. The cub looked up at her. His growling slowly stopped. Even in the middle of her own suffering, she comforted him first. Kael silently witnessed everything. The elderly royal healer stepped forward. My king. Kael nodded. What is it? The healer looked around the courtroom. I have served 3 generations of this family. I have watched people under pressure. He turned toward Elena. Fear changes the eyes. Guilt changes the voice. He bowed respectfully. I do not see guilt. Several nobles protested immediately. That's opinion. Not evidence. The healer nodded. It is. But I ask only that judgment not be rushed. Selene's smile nearly disappeared. She hadn't expected anyone to defend Elena, especially not someone respected by the entire kingdom. She spoke quickly. Compassion is admirable. But evidence cannot be ignored. The necklace was found in her room. Commander Darius stepped forward. My lady. Selene turned. Yes, Commander. Who searched Miss Elena's room first? The Eastern Guard. I would like to question every guard involved. Selene remained calm. Of course. Though inside, a flicker of concern appeared. Kael slowly rose from the throne. The movement alone silenced the entire hall. He descended the marble steps one at a time. Every eye followed him. He stopped directly before Elena. She lowered her head. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I cannot explain what happened. Kael looked at the frightened Omega, then at the tiny prince standing protectively beside her. He asked only one question. When the guards searched your room, were you present? No. Had anyone entered your chamber before you returned? I don't know. Kael nodded slowly. His thoughts moved carefully. Too carefully. This case contained certainty and uncertainty. He disliked uncertainty. A noble suddenly shouted. What more is there to discuss? The evidence is obvious. Kael turned his head slowly. His golden eyes became ice. The noble immediately fell silent. The king finally spoke. His voice was calm, powerful. Every word echoed through the chamber. Justice is not built upon haste. He looked toward the guards. The necklace was found. That is fact. He looked toward Elena. She denies the accusation. That is also fact. He turned toward the court. I will not condemn anyone until every question has been answered. Murmurs spread through the nobles. Selene stepped forward. My king. The kingdom expects justice. Kael met her eyes. And justice requires truth. Not assumptions. Not fear. Truth. He raised one hand. The royal court became perfectly silent. My order is this. No punishment will be carried out today. Gasps echoed through the hall. The investigation will continue. Every servant, every guard, every witness will be questioned. His gaze swept across the room. If anyone has lied, they will answer to me. A chill passed through the entire court. Selene felt it too. For the first time that day, she felt uneasy. Elena looked up in surprise. My king. You believe me? Kael answered honestly. I believe that the truth has not yet been revealed. It wasn't a declaration of innocence, but it was enough. It was the first person willing to search for the truth instead of accepting the easiest answer. Tears filled Elena's eyes. She bowed deeply. Thank you. Nearby, Orion happily wagged his tail. As if he understood. The court slowly emptied. Nobles whispered angrily among themselves. Some believed Elena was guilty. Others began questioning how such a careful thief could have hidden only one priceless necklace. Commander Darius quietly organized the investigation. Every guard would be questioned. Every servant interviewed. Every hallway examined. No detail would be ignored. Far above the courtroom, Luna Selene stood alone on a balcony overlooking the snowy palace grounds. Her face remained calm. But inside, her confidence had begun to crack. She had expected Elena to be imprisoned immediately. Instead, the Alpha King had chosen patience. And patience was dangerous. Because patience often uncovered secrets. Far below, the frightened maid who had planted the necklace hid behind a stone pillar. Tears streamed down her face. She whispered to herself, I can't do this anymore. I have to tell someone. Unseen by everyone else, Commander Darius happened to notice the trembling servant disappearing into the shadows. His eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And for the first time since the accusation began, a tiny crack appeared in the lie that threatened to destroy Elena's life.